Hi, and welcome back to Psychology 2, looking at the chapter on thinking, intelligence, and language. Now we're going to pick up where we left off, the measurement of intelligence, and then we'll cover language. Even as researchers are working to understand what intelligence is, other researchers are trying to determine how to measure intelligence. The measurement of intelligence we'll start with, and we're going to begin with the StanfordBinet Intelligence Scale. French public school system wanted to identify children who were unlikely to benefit from regular classroom instruction. And in 1905, the Binet-Simon scale was created. This was created by Theodore Simon and Alfred Binet. The Binet-Simon scale yielded a score called mental age. MA, mental age. The MA indicates the intellectual level at which a child is functioning. Items on the tests are structured according to increasing difficulty, with the easiest items first. Each succeeding item becomes more difficult than the last. Children go as far as they could, and then the progress was compared with others of the same age. Now, Louis Terman, he worked at Stanford University and adapted the test for use of children in the U.S. The test became known as the StanfordBinet Intelligence Scale, the SBIS, and the test was used with children ages 2 to 16. The SBIS yielded an intelligence quotient, or an IQ, rather than a mental age. IQ reflects the relationship between a child's mental age and their actual chronological age. You'll see, IQ is the mental age over chronological age times 100, and that produces a score. Today's IQ scores are derived by comparing results of those other people in the same age category. Now, a second testing is what's known as the Westler Scales. David Westler developed a series of scales where each subtest measures a different intellectual task. These scales can be grouped into verbal task, required knowledge on verbal concepts, and performance tasks, required familiarity with spatial relationship concepts. Westler introduced the concept of deviation IQ. He based IQ on how a person's answers compared to those who attained by people of the same age group. The average level is defined as IQ, and it's a score of 100. IQ scores were distributed so that the middle 50% of them were defined as the broad average, and that was a range between 90 and 110. Only 4% of the population have an IQ above 130 or below 70. Now, there's another form of test, and it's known as group tests. Now, group tests were first developed during World War I for the use with large numbers of people in schools and in the armed forces. Today, several group tests are widely used, such as the Canadian Cognitive Abilities Test, the California Test of Mental Maturity, and the Otis Lennon Mental Ability Test. However, numbers alone cannot adequately reflect children's abilities and talents. Just one source of information where a variety of sources may be more beneficial for students. Now, differences in intellectual functioning. Now, there has been issues with IQ measurement, as they in no way consider social factors, gender, or other diversity issues that measurement tools do not consider. What other factors might be influencing intelligence and intelligence tests? So we'll touch on gender differences. Girls are somewhat more superior to boys in verbal ability, and boys seem to do somewhat better on manipulation visual images and working memory. Males, they generally obtain higher scores in math tests. Historically, it has been clear women have been excluded from world affairs and STEM. STEM being science, technology, education, and mathematics. And so it's argued that because of a cultural preference for men to be in these STEM fields and not women, it can explain why some women may not score as high on some of these tests. They haven't been exposed and given as many opportunities. These things are changing. However, they've been a long-standing inequity. These are group differences between men and women. There are differences within groups, that is, between men and between women. The larger differences are between women and then between men. That seems to be the largest difference. Now, another reason that some of these differences can occur in scores is socioeconomic and ethnic differences. Intelligence tests score differ between ethnic groups. European North Americans and Asian North Americans tend to score higher than other ethnic groups. Lower class students obtain IQ scores 10 to 15 points lower than those obtained by middle or upper class children. Native Canadian children tend to score lower than non-native Canadian children on IQ tests. Researchers have determined that there are additional factors that influence differences in intelligence scores among ethnic groups. Socioeconomic status, cultural attitudes towards education. The recognition of cross-cultural assessment of intelligence is flawed, and the biases exist within the tests. Most psychologists believe that ethnic differences reflect attitudes towards education rather than inborn racial differences. Research shows that parental encouragement and supervision in combination with peer support and academic achievement partially explain the superior performance by some ethnic groups. Now, there is an argument, the nature-nurture in intelligence. Here we're going to explore the nature, which is genetic influences, versus nurture, which are environmental influences. And the argument is related to intelligence. So genetic influences on intelligence research, it has been completed, includes kinship studies, twin studies, and adoptee studies. Now you'll see in figure 7.8 on page 172 a breakdown of this. IQ scores of identical twins are more alike than scores of any other pairs. All in all, studies generally suggest that the heritability of intelligence is between 40 and 60%. Brain imaging explored possible gender differences in intellectual functioning. Brain hemispheres may be more specialized in males than in females. Women appear to be using both hemispheres for certain functions, a greater chance for recovery if there's ever damage to one hemisphere or the other. Now we can also look then, therefore, at the environmental influence, the nurture part of intelligence. The home environment and style of parenting can influence intelligence. Children of mothers who are emotionally and verbally responsive, engage with children, furnish appropriate play materials and are involved with their children, encouraging independence and providing varied daily experiences during the early years, often can obtain higher IQ scores later on. Organization and safety in the home have also been linked to higher IQs and achievement on achievement tests, scores, and at later ages in life. We can add to this education. Education contributes to intelligence. The Aboriginal Head Start programs enhance IQ scores, achievement scores, and academic skills on the Native Canadian children. Children who have been in school longer obtain higher IQ scores. IQ scores tend to decrease during summer vacation. Surprise! Now there's an effect that's known as the Flynn Effect. Flynn found that IQ scores in the Western world increased substantially between 1947 and 2022 by around 18 points. The genetic code could not have changed enough in that time to account for those differences. We do not evolve anywhere near that time frame. Thinking in the neighborhood closer to 50 to 100,000 years is more realistic. Instead, this change is attributed to social and cultural factors, including the improved educational system and the penetration of mass media. Intellectual functioning seemed to be an interaction of genetic, physical, personal, and sociocultural factors. Now, emerging later in the last 30, 25 years has been another form of intelligence that's taken some front and center, and that is emotional intelligence. This is the social and emotional skills that are a form of intelligence. These are similar to Gardner's proposed intrapersonal and interpersonal skills. Emotional intelligence involves our own awareness of emotions, so that's the recognizing and acknowledging our own feelings, and our ability to manage these emotions, expressing them in an appropriate manner. And the self-motivation, that is the strength of emotional self-control, and the pursuing of worthy goals and persisting in a task. Failure to develop this intelligence is connected with poor ability to cope with stress, depression, and aggressive behavior. Now, critics state that these areas are important for determining life outcomes, but there is nothing to gain by calling them intelligences. So if we move into the next sort of an area and we start looking at creativity and intelligence, are they related? Are they connected in some capacity? Creativity may be defined as the ability to do things that are novel and useful. Creative people share characteristics. Things like they take chances. They refuse to accept limitations. They appreciate art and music, and they use materials around them to make unique things. They challenge social norms. They take unpopular stands. They examine ideas that other people accept at face value. Now, there's two types of thinking that can contribute to creativity. One is called convergent thinking. This is where thought is limited to only what's available to me here and now, the present facts. And then divergent thinking. Here the problem solver associates freely to the elements of the problem. Problem solving can involve both kinds of thinking. Now, the research indicates that the relationship between intelligence test scores and standard measures of creativity are only moderate. All right, we've concluded our review of intelligence, and now we're going to move on to language. What is language? The bits and pieces of language and the theories of language, looking again at nature-nurture. So language, communication by non-humans. Language is a system of symbols along with rules that are used to manipulate the symbols. Now, apes have been taught to use symbols to communicate as a way of looking at non-humans and communication. Do apes really use language? Well, chimpanzees do not have a vocal tract adapted for speech, and their communications using sign language or symbols consist of constructions strung together rather than a sentence. Although apes have a hyoid bone, this is the bone in our necks that assists with speech. Theirs is anterior in their neck, ours is posterior. And so that makes a huge difference. Now, the two apes referred to in your text, Washoe was taught to use 181 signs by the age of 32, and Kanzi is reported to have the grammatical abilities of a 2.5-year-old child. Now, critics suggest that apes can string together signs in a given sequence to earn rewards just as pigeons can, lower on the evolutionary scale, if you will, and can learn to peck buttons in sequences. It can take apes longer to learn new signs than it takes children to learn new words. Apes are unreliable in their sequencing of signs, suggesting that by and large they do not comprehend the rules of grammar. It doesn't mean they don't communicate, just not in language structures like what humans do. People observing apes' sign may be subject to the observer bias, where they positively acknowledge signs as being meaningful, when maybe they're not. So, what is language? Language is the communication of thoughts and feelings by means of symbols that are arranged to rules of grammar. Language is one of the human assets that have enabled us to survive and prosper. Rigorous definitions suggest only humans use language. Language makes it possible for us to communicate knowledge to one another. It creates a vehicle for recording experiences. Language allows us to put ourselves in the shoes of other people and to learn more than what we could learn through just direct experience. Provides many units of thinking. True language is distinguished from the communication systems of lower animals by properties such as semanticity, infinite creativity, and displacement. So let's look at those. Semanticity. This is the sound of language has meaning. So semantic. Infinite creativity, the capacity to create rather than just imitate sentences. And then displacement, the capacity to communicate information about events and objects in other time or place. So there's qualities about language that we possess that apes and other non-humans don't. Language and cognition, this component here. The relationship is not often thought about. It is very complex and not always obvious. Jean Piaget believed that language reflects knowledge of the world, but that much knowledge can be acquired without language. We can understand the concepts of roundness or red even when we don't know or use the word round or red. A term introduced to describe the thinking about thinking is called metacognition. It's considered to be a part of intelligence. It's somewhat of a self-reflective activity. When we consider a different way of approach to a problem, an issue, or a concern, we often try to correct our thinking. We use metacognition. Language and culture is more about how or in what way does culture affect language. The linguistic relativity hypothesis. Language structures the way we perceive the world. The English language has hundreds of words to describe colors. The Shona-speaking people have only 3 words for colors. Your text highlights the Inuit word for snow, or words for snow. This theory is not widely accepted due to things like infants displaying considerable intelligence before they have learned to speak. They are representing the world without words. So what makes up language? What are the bits and pieces of language? So we're going to go through all the little bits and pieces of what makes up our language. And we're going to start with phonemes. Now phonemes, these are the smallest units of sound. They form the basic building blocks of the spoken language. 3 phonemes together form the sound of the word cat. The C, which sounds like a K, A, and T, phonemes do not sound like the letters of the alphabet as we recite them, and letters that may be combined create phonemes such as TH or CH. They create a different phoneme. So there are perhaps 100 or so different sounds that could serve as phonemes, but only about 45 are used in the English language. Morphemes, this is the smallest unit of meaning. In almost all cases in the English language, the morphemes is made of 2 or more phonemes. A few phonemes act as morphemes, such as the article a and the personal pronoun I. Many words in the English language are single morphemes. Book, word, learn, reason are examples. Although morphemes singly and in combination form the words in the language and provide meaning, the sounds and single word alone are not enough. This introduces syntax. Syntax are the rules of language, used to put words together in sentences. The important rule of syntax in English is that adjectives usually come before nouns. For example, yellow lights. While in French, it is reversed. Le feu jaune, or the light yellow. And then there's semantics. Either the literal or underlying meaning of utterances. Semantics refer to the meaning we derive from morphemes, words, and sentences. The same word can have different meanings depending upon how it's used in a sentence. For example, I don't mind your manners, and he has lost his mind are all using the word mind in a different way. And then there are pragmatics. These come into play when we use socially understood cues to imply further meaning. We can use intonation to imply sarcasm or emphasis, or when we ask a question. When we ask a question, our voice tends to lift at the end of the sentence to indicate a question, and if we're making a statement, it tends to trail off at the end to make a statement. That's just tone. So nature and nurture in language development. Language development reflects the interaction between the influences of heredity, that's the nature, and the environment, which is the nurture. So we'll start with learning theory and language development. Language develops according to imitation and reinforcement. Parents serve as models. Observation and imitation are important concepts here. Learning theory cannot account for the unchanging sequence of language development and spurts in children's language acquisition. Now, Noam Chomsky came up with or speaks quite a lot about nativism approach to language development, and it suggests that language development is innate or it's inborn. Nature causes children just to attend to the acquired language in a certain way. Psycholinguistic theory, language acquisition involves the interaction of environmental influences such as exposure to parental speech and reinforcement and the inborn tendency to acquire language. Now this is unique to the theory. Language activation device, or LAD, this was what was proposed by Noam Chomsky, is an inborn tendency that prepares the nervous system to learn grammar. Universal grammar and underlying set of rules for turning ideas into sentences. So learning more than one language, is that good, bad, or how does that affect intelligence or language? Well, bilingualism we'll begin with. Learning a second language is advantageous for linguistic, cognitive, and social development. Students in French immersion school develop stronger language competence skills and perform better in the reading and comprehension component of the EQAO testing in grade 3 and grade 6. So now, this again as a reminder that we do these things more as a review in the video, so that's completing thinking, intelligence, and language on the chapter. Now we're going to explore this chapter on development next week, where we're going to review prenatal development, physical, cognitive, and moral and social development over our lifetime. So we'll see you next week. Good luck, everybody. I hope it's going well. Bye for now.